Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to the Daybreak Asia podcast. I'm Dan Schwartzman. Doug Krisner is off this week. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit is scheduled for next week in South Korea. President Trump is expected to meet with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung and Chinese President Xi Jinping for separate bilateral talks that may shape trade relations for years to come. In the States, senior South Korean officials visited Washington today to resume trade negotiations to bridge their differences over Seoul's $350 billion investment pledge under a bilateral trade deal struck in July. For more on what's ahead at the APEC Summit, we heard from Kang Kyung-hwa, South Korean ambassador to the United States. She spoke to Bloomberg's Joe Mathieu and Julie Fine on Balance of Power.
Madam Ambassador, it's great to see you. Thank you for being with us on Bloomberg.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
There's so much we could talk about with a pretty wide-ranging agenda for the summit next week. We're spending so much time in America talking about whether Trump and Xi will have a productive meeting, whether they'll sit down at all, when in fact, I'm curious about your relationship with the United States and the extent to which this summit will help to codify the framework trade agreement that you've already made.
Well, we're very happy that the president will be coming to Gyeongju during the APEC Summit week. We very much expect the two presidents, my president and President Trump, to have a very productive second summit meeting. They had a wonderful first on October 25th here in Washington. So, there a lot of follow-up discussions have been taking place since then on both the security side and, of course, on the trade side, on the investment package. In fact, the two principal players on our part on the investment package are in town. I think they're talking still, if not, the talk is over with Mr. Lutnick, and trying to nail down the remaining points of disagreement between the two sides. So. Lots of movement, but both on the trade side and on the security side. But the goal is for the 7 decades old alliance to move towards the future. I mean, so much has changed. The global security environment is changing, and we want to adapt and stay ahead of the challenges so that we grow the alliance into a future-oriented, comprehensive, and strategic partnership, not just on security, but economic alliance, but also on a technology alliance.
When you take the wide-eye view, what is the best outcome from APEC in terms of tariffs that so many nations have been struggling with when it comes to the United States, figuring out exactly how to get that right?
I think APEC is a year-long process. So, yes, it culminates with that summit week, next week, in fact. But there are a whole series of senior officials meetings, ministerial meetings. On the trade side, there was a meeting of the trade ministers of the 21 economies, and this included Mr. Greer from the U.S. side. And they've come up with a joint statement, I believe it was called, committing these economies to, providing a trading and environment that is transparent, predictable, and business friendly. So that discussion, I think, was a very encouraging one. That yes, as challenging as these tariff issues are at a bilateral level, there is a commitment to moving forward in a joint direction for the environment, for the ministers to make it more transparent, predictable, and friendly for businesses. So.
Speaking of being friendly for businesses, we recall what took place in September in Georgia at the Hyundai plant following the immigration raid there. Some 500 workers were detained, and this was obviously a very difficult spot for our relationship with South Korea. I don't know to what extent you helped to broker the exit at that time, but I wonder, when you consider the investment pledge that you're describing, has there been any guarantee that this will not take place again as part of this investment pledge?
The two sides have really quickly responded, both my government and our U.S. counterparts. And we've established a working group that have worked through these issues for some quick fixes, as well as some issues on the longer horizon. The working group has met once, and I think, in fact, just yesterday evening for the second time. We have clarified what can be done with a B1 visa, and the ESTA entry permit, and so what the Korean investors and the workers who come with these investments is clarity as to what they can do.
Right.
And much of the discussions have been about bringing that clarity that has now gone up on the website of the U.S. Embassy in Korea. A desk dedicated to investors and workers going to the United States will be established within the U.S. Embassy for a fast-track processing of visa requirements from these workers. So very already visible progress. Korean workers are already coming in, and we will continue these discussions. But in the longer term, for the investors, of course, they want assurances, longer-term assurances that they can send their workers and come in and do the work that's required to install, to maintain, and make sure that what's invested is up and running. Right?
Are skilled worker visas worth $100,000 for a company like Hyundai? Are you talking about that?
We're not talking about the H-1B visas. Okay. We're talking about much more short-term work visas. And I think the B-1 visa, with the clarification, will go a long way in addressing that. But we very much want, there's been a legislation in Congress for many, over 12 years now, of a specific E-4 visa quota for Korean workers coming in. That would certainly be a longer-term solution and give the assurance to the investors.
Do you think that investors will be deterred at this point until they have those assurances? Do you think it'll keep them from really wanting to put more money here?
Well, I think the commitment of my government and certainly my counterparts, both in the White House and the State Department, they are very committed. We all realize that this should not have happened, and we need to move beyond this and give the investors the assurances that they can commit to the United States. I think the government can give as much assurance as we can, and we are, and my American counterparts are doing the same. In the end, it's a business decision, and working towards a $350 billion investment package. Yes, I think they have every need and right to demand that assurance and reliability of the entry procedures and the ability to work here.
To what extent has China made overtures to your government in terms of an economic relationship, in terms of maybe finding alternatives to U.S. investment?
Well, I'm not part of the discussion on that bilateral front, but the latest news has been the announcement of their sanctions on the 5 entities of a big Korean shipbuilder in the United States, and we're seeing what the implications of this mean for that company in particular, but for the overall investment. I think it's a concern. Of course, any sanctions from any significant economic power is something to be taken very seriously. So I understand that Seoul is in discussion with Beijing about the direct implications of that. And beyond that, China is a very important partner to us economically. It's a very close neighbor geographically, and we've been building close relationship with China for decades, and we intend to continue to do that.
That was Kang Kyung-hwa, South Korean ambassador to the U.S., speaking to Bloomberg's Joe Mathieu and Julie Fine. Coming up, we'll hear from South Korea Finance Minister Cheol from the sidelines of the APEC Finance Ministers Meeting in South Korea. Welcome back to the Daybreak Asia podcast. I'm Dan Schwartzman. Doug Krisner is off this week. As mentioned earlier, South Korea and the U.S. are working on finalizing details over their tariff framework. Seoul and Washington are focusing on the structure of a $350 billion investment pledge rather than a currency swap. That's according to Finance Minister Cheol. Koo spoke exclusively to Bloomberg's Shery from the sidelines of the APEC Finance Ministers Meeting in South Korea.
We understand that the U.S. investment fund has been very difficult to agree on the details, and you've told Secretary Bessent about the feasibility of having so much cash up front. Should we be expecting installments in payments then?
지금 베센트 장관은 한국의 외환
Bessent has understood that due to the current state of Korea's foreign exchange market, we cannot pay up front. He understands that. However, regarding how to proceed on this, with negotiations currently underway with the U.S., I ask for your understanding that I cannot yet provide specific details on the plan.
Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong said that the maximum amount that can be raised in dollars annually without market disruptions is $20 billion. Are we looking at around those figures right now?
예, 저희들이 maximum.
Yes, the Bank of Korea currently estimates that the maximum amount we can raise without significantly impacting the foreign exchange market is $20 billion.
What does that mean for upfront payments, though? Does that mean front-loading some and then paying annually?
그런 부분
Regarding that aspect, we are keeping various possibilities open for the foreign exchange market and are currently in negotiations with the United States.
Because that's one of the options that you've talked to Secretary Bessent and to Washington about.
그것은 제가 지금 확인하기가 어렵고요. 다만
I cannot confirm that at this time. However, Secretary Bessent fully understands the difficulties in Korea's FX market and is having internal discussions on how to respond to the situation.
Because of the potential financial shocks to South Korea, there was a lot of talk about a potential currency swap agreement. Is that still on the table?
통화 수합은 미국과 한국 간의 이
Whether a currency swap is needed and to what extent will depend entirely on how the deal is structured. It may not be necessary at all, or it could be arranged on a smaller scale. Therefore, the currency swap itself is a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. So, depending on how this deal turns out, we plan to consult with the U.S. regarding the currency swap aspect as well.
통화 수합이 된다고 인해서
Even if we have a currency swap, it will be difficult to just blindly provide money to the U.S. without considering the commercial rationality or viability of the project being selected.
I'm understanding then that this option is still alive. If that's the case, when it comes to perhaps the structure, could it be something similar as to the Argentina style going through the Treasury instead of directly from the Fed?
지금 이 통화 수합에 대해서는 우리가
Regarding the currency swap, we're not doing it because we lack short-term foreign reserves like Argentina. It's a situation where Korea needs foreign currency to make long-term investments as requested by the U.S. So the U.S. must provide the lacking foreign currency. Therefore, it doesn't align with the conventional short-term currency swap structure. So, regarding that aspect, if we were to engage in a currency swap arrangement with the U.S., there are further points that require discussions.
The South Korean won at 1,400 per dollar. Is that the new normal? Do you think that reflects fundamentals?
지금 가장 영향을 많이 받는 부분이 이 관세.
We believe much of the recent depreciation reflects market concern that the tariff negotiations haven't been finalized. So, we are currently pursuing negotiations with the U.S. within a range that doesn't significantly impact Korea's foreign exchange market. Fortunately, U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent is fully aware of the situation in Korea's foreign exchange market. Therefore, once the issue is resolved, that uncertainty will likely fade.
We have seen clearly the impact on South Korean automakers because the tariffs continue to be, of course, much higher than for Japan, for Europe, who already the U.S. has lifted those levies. What can the government do at this point to support the sector?
일단 단기적으로는 지금
In the short term, the government is providing all possible policy support to automakers and auto parts companies facing difficulties due to these higher tariffs compared to the EU and Japan. We believe that if these negotiations yield some breakthrough, those issues could also be resolved.
In these ongoing trade negotiations, is the fact that South Korea would lose its advantage over, say, Japan before the trade deal, because Korea had a free trade agreement with the U.S., it had an advantage of around 2.5%. Is that being discussed at this point?
예, 그런 부분을 제가 트럼프 대통령께도 말씀을 드렸고.
I conveyed that point to President Trump and explained to Bessent and Lutnick. I explained that since Korea is an FTA partner, tariffs on Korea are already sufficiently low, but tariffs on other countries aren't sufficiently low, making it unfair. Even so, it seems the U.S. isn't very willing to understand that aspect. In any case, we plan to continue explaining and persuading them.
Because of the exuberance around artificial intelligence, we are seeing South Korea's stock market on a tear. Are you concerned that this could be a market bubble?
예, 지금의 주식시장은 한국 경제에 대한 기대 또는
The current stock market reflects expectations for the Korean economy, such as enhancing shareholder value in the Korean capital market, expanding dividends, or resolving unfair practices. Expectations for the modernization of the Korean stock market. On top of these expectations, we are actively supporting the core technology economy to ensure a robust Korean economy that can be a global investment destination.
That was South Korea Finance Minister Cheol speaking through a translator to Bloomberg's Shery from the sidelines of the APEC Finance Ministers Meeting in South Korea.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia Edition podcast. Each weekday, we look at the stories shaping markets, finance, and geopolitics in the Asia Pacific. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Podcast YouTube channel, or anywhere else you listen. Join us again tomorrow for insight on the market moves from Hong Kong to Singapore and Australia. I'm Doug Krisner, and this is Bloomberg.